Yeah, that's right, it's me, Jimmy Kimmel.
Before Jimmy Kimmel would be named one of Time Magazine's 100 most influential people in the world and receive a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame.
Steve Colbert. It's nice having, like, guests from other shows. It's kind of like when, like,
Family?
yeah, no, it's like when Laverne and Shirley would come on Happy Days.
Yeah.
Before Jimmy Kimmel would host the American Music Awards, the EPSI Awards, the Emmys, and the Oscars.
This is so humiliating. I'm sorry. I mean, you lost, and now you gotta stand out here for the rest of the night in front of everybody. That's really...
Before Jimmy Kimmel would have an ongoing feud with Matt Damon on the Jimmy Kimmel Live show.
Matt Damon, I'm sorry we ran out of time.
Apologies to Matt Damon, ran out of time.
Apologies to Matt Damon. He had a baby today, so it really was the wrong thing to do to bump him, but we had to.
Unfortunately, we are totally out of time.
Before Jimmy Kimmel would clock in 10 million subscribers on YouTube and go viral online with his series Celebrities Read Mean Tweets and Celebrities Undercover. Oh yeah, also there was his worst twerk fail ever prank that fooled the world. Growing up, he was in the church choir, he was an altar boy, and was in the school band, but this was all a clever disguise for young Jimmy. When his parents weren't looking, he was a notorious prankster who would terrorize his neighborhood and his teaching staff. Jimmy Kimmel fell in love with David Letterman and worked long and hard to climb to the top of Hollywood. His pranks would result in him getting fired time and time again, and he watched his closest friends find fame and fortune before he would get his big break, but that happened soon enough with Jimmy Kimmel Live. What's going on, guys? My name is Michael McCrudden, documenting the life and career of Jimmy Kimmel prior to fame, here for you on Before They're Famous. Now, Jimmy Kimmel is my favorite of the late night hosts, but in the past we have done videos on James Corden and I've done Jimmy Fallon, although that one really needs an update. Anyways, guys, let me know who your favorite late night host is in the comments down below, and well, now let's roll that intro. Jimmy Kimmel was born James Christian Kimmel on November 13th, 1967 in Brooklyn, New York City, New York. And Jimmy grew up the eldest of three in the working class neighborhood of Jamaica Bay. His father, James John Kimball, worked at IBM as an executive and is of Irish, German, and Welsh ancestry. His mother, Joan, a homemaker, is of Italian descent. 100%.
That's my actual mom. What are you making, Mom?
Peanut butter and jelly sandwich.
And how many sandwiches have you made?
Just about 7,000.
Jimmy likes to keep his family close and has involved them in his work throughout his career. In fact, the first guest he ever had on the air was his Uncle Frank. He's also featured his Aunt Chippy and his cousin Sal as regulars on his show, although I'm pretty certain Sal isn't actually a cousin. His family moved to Las Vegas when he was 9 years old, where Jimmy would spend his formative years running around the neighborhood of Meadowlark Lane, playing sports, building clubhouses, and getting into fights. He built up a tight group of friends, including Escobedo and Jim Gentleman. The boys kept up a clean image, taking band classes together at Kenny Ginn Junior High, and they all went to the same Christ the King Catholic Community Church, where they sang in the choir and where Jimmy was an altar boy for 7 years.
Yeah, I was there for 7 years.
7 years?
Yeah, I actually liked it.
Did you whack the stuff? Did you go in the back and get the wine?
I never did
You
that.
never did that?
No.
That's
no.
what started me off.
Outside of school and in the afternoons, him and his pals were hellraisers. One woman in particular by the name of Karen Schilling, well, they would prank order food and cabs to her door, they would tie empty cans to the back of her car, and Jimmy mastered the art of placing a small charge in each of her cigarettes, causing them to explode.
What the fuck was that?
Outside of pranks, Jimmy had found an early obsession watching Late Night with David Letterman.
Take it and shake it.
Shake it. Take it and shake it.
Jimmy didn't have a VCR growing up and wasn't allowed to stay up late enough to watch his favorite shows. So we would have his friends recorded and then he would make his rounds around the neighborhood to watch. Jimmy attended Ed W. Clark High School, where he was a straight A student, although he didn't put in a lot of effort. His high school actually built a shrine to honor the 1985 alumni. Now, Jimmy was far from a ladies' man, but thrived as a class clown, and he never took any comedy or acting classes, but his favorite class, it was visual arts. In fact, the guy is a brilliant illustrator. When he was 16, he was working at a clothing store when a co-worker who worked at a college radio station invited him to come check out his act. Jimmy knew that David Letterman had started on the radio, so he thought, yeah, what the hell? He started doing local interviews, and the joy he got of having his friends and family tune in ignited his never-ending passion for show business. He was so determined that he even bought a custom license plate for his first car, an Isuzu I-Mark, which read Late Night. He enrolled at the University of Las Vegas, but then moved out to the University of Arizona, where he got a job on a professional radio show. It was here he also met his first wife, Gina Maddie, who he married at the age of 20, and soon after they had their first of 2 children. It was time for Jimmy to get to work, so he dropped out of school and started working full-time on the radio. The next few years were a tough break for Jimmy and his young family. He was laid off from his first radio gig and then moved to Seattle and Tampa, where he was fired from both shows. It was the prankster inside Jimmy that led to his demise. He would terrorize his bosses, calling their wives, posting naked photos of them, and sneaking into their offices through the roof. This always resulted in him getting canned. He finally got a steady gig in Palm Springs, California, where he hired a young Carson Daly as his intern.
Jimmy, aren't you his mentor or something? Aren't you Carson's mentor?
Carson and I did a radio show together in Palm Springs when Carson was, you're 19 and I was 24.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Soon after, Jimmy got working at KROQ in Los Angeles. He started off as a producer but worked his way on air and made lifelong friends with Adam Carolla, who he booked as a guest and got on the show. In a strange turn of events, both Adam and Carson found fame and fortune before Jimmy Kimmel. It wasn't until 1997 that he finally got a gig on TV as a co-host on Win Ben Stein's Money. The gig paid a measly $550 an episode, so Jimmy had to keep his day job on the radio, waking up at 5 a.m. and working well into the night.
Now, we've got a sudden death tie thing here.
Now rubbing shoulders with those in television, Jimmy got to work pitching an original concept titled The Man Show. Kimmel asked Carolla to be his co-host on the show, which premiered on Comedy Central in June of 1999, and it involved them drinking beer, watching women jump on trampolines, and stuff like this.
I can do the splits all the way to the ground.
Well, let's see it. Let's have a look. Splits all the way down to the ground.
Actually, that kind of looks like my kind of show, right? Now, this show was a huge success with males between the ages of 18 to 34 and stayed on the air for 6 seasons. When the show was canceled, Jimmy was also going through a divorce, and things were looking pretty bleak. But ABC had wanted to get into the late night game and decided to take a chance on Jimmy Kimmel, allowing him to fulfill his destiny.
Jimmy Kimmel Live, breaking into late night after the Super Bowl.
For the first few weeks of the show, Jimmy had trouble booking guests, especially women. The ratings were mediocre and the reviews were even worse. One critic from The New Yorker described the show as dead on arrival. Jimmy persevered and entered into a 7-year relationship with Sarah Silverman. As he shed his man show shtick and began appealing to a wider audience, Jimmy began to creep up in the ratings. Still today, he's labeled as a dark horse in the late night community, but he's actually one of the veterans in the game these days. I could go into more detail about his career while the host of the Jimmy Kimmel Live show, but I'm gonna wrap this one up because this is before they're famous. My name is Michael McCrudden and we make all sorts of celebrity bios here for you on this channel. Be sure to browse around, hit subscribe, let me know who your favorite late night host is in the comments down below. I'll see you guys in another video.
Oh, hey, Jimmy.
Yeah.
Tell your mom I like them apples.